It's not that often that someone is known around the world by only their first name. When you're the legendary singer-songwriter from Texas turned 91 years old. And tonight,
I started writing poems when I was 5 and learning chords on a guitar when I was 21 kids. And they all played some kind of musical instrument, including him. And
Willie Nelson isn't just a country music legend. He is a living monument carved from pain, perseverance, and poetic rebellion. The man who gave us On the Road Again wasn't merely singing about freedom. He was confessing the ache of a soul that never stopped moving. Every note he played carried the dust of Texas highways and the loneliness of a boy who learned too soon that love doesn't always stay. But behind that warm melody lies a man who has weathered storms far greater than most could imagine. For over 7 decades, he stood unshaken through betrayal, collapse, and unspeakable loss, turning disgrace into dignity, silence into anthems, and grief into grace. His songs weren't written for applause. They were built from the ruins of everything he survived. Now, at 92, while most would rest, Willie still stands before us, fragile yet fierce, with a quiet fire that refuses to fade. Behind that calm smile is the weight of ghosts, memories, and truths too heavy for words. The final years of his journey may hold revelations more haunting than any song he's ever sung. Don't look away, because what he's still enduring might reveal the most powerful chapter of all the story of a man who turned every scar into melody, every wound into wisdom. And if his voice has ever stirred something inside you, leave a like below as a tribute to a man who gave the world everything and still hasn't stopped giving. Some hearts are born with cracks too wide for childhood to fill, and sometimes from those cracks the light begins to sing. But the darkest secret was yet to be revealed. Before he became an outlaw, before his braids and his weathered smile became American icons, Willie Nelson was simply a boy from Abbott, Texas, chasing the sound of belonging. Born on April 29, 1933, in the depths of the Great Depression, his story didn't begin with privilege or promise. It began with absence. His mother, a dancer with dreams too big for small-town life, walked out when he was still in diapers. His father, struggling to survive, soon followed. That left Willie and his sister Bobby in the care of their grandparents, 2 humble souls who taught them the hymns of hope long before the world taught them heartbreak. His grandfather, a blacksmith with hands calloused from fire and steel, was the first to place a guitar in young Willie's arms. That gesture, simple and quiet, would become the defining act of his life. Music wasn't entertainment, it was escape. Each note was a way to rewrite the pain he couldn't explain. Each chord a whispered promise that one day he would be more than the boy everyone left behind. But pain has a way of becoming a teacher. When pneumonia took his grandfather, Willie was just 6 years old, and the small safety he'd known vanished again. In his autobiography, he would later write, "Our separation from mother and daddy seemed worse than a death because they were still out there in the world, but they weren't with me and Bobby like they were supposed to be." That line captures the core of Willie Nelson's legend, not rebellion for its own sake, but rebellion born from abandonment. By the time most children were learning to ride bikes, Willie was learning how to survive silence. He turned to the radio for company, memorizing the lonesome tunes of Hank Williams and Ernest Tubb. He scribbled lyrics on scraps of paper between farm chores, writing not for fame, but to feel seen. The cotton fields of Texas became his classroom, and the guitar his only companion taught him that art doesn't come from comfort, it comes from ache. And yet, even in the poverty and dust of Abbott, there was light. Bobby played piano beside him, her small fingers dancing across the keys while Willie followed on guitar. Together they became a duet of survival, 2 children raising each other with melodies instead of words. Their grandparents made sure the church knew their names. On Sundays, the Nelson siblings sang gospel hymns to small congregations who could barely afford to tithe. But when Willie sang, heads lifted. There was something in his voice, a tremor of truth, a ghost of hurt that made even strangers stop and listen. By the time he reached his teens, the dream had already taken root. He played for beer money in roadside bars, performed with local polka bands, and wrote songs between shifts picking cotton. He didn't believe in miracles, but he believed in persistence. That would become his defining trait, the quiet, stubborn belief that even if the world ignored him, he'd keep singing until it couldn't. There's a strange beauty in realizing that the man who would one day redefine American music began his journey as a forgotten child on the edges of nowhere. In those early years, he wasn't writing hits. He was writing his way out of loneliness. And that's the paradox that still defines Willie Nelson. For all his fame, awards, and acclaim, his music has never been about victory. It's been about endurance, the sacred act of standing up after every fall. The boy who was left behind never stopped walking, never stopped singing, and never stopped searching for home. Because long before the world called him a legend, he was already learning how to turn heartbreak into hymn. But what came next would test that fragile faith in ways no song could ever prepare him for. Before fame, before rebellion, before the world ever called him outlaw, Willie Nelson was a child learning how to survive in a silence too loud to bear. Abbott, Texas wasn't a place that made dreams, it was where dreams went to hide. The town was small, the sky endless, and the poverty so constant it felt like weather. But within that stillness, a little boy sat with a second-hand guitar across his knees, strumming to fill the void where love should have been. His mother, Myrle, had drifted away to chase a life of her own. His father, Ira, remarried and soon disappeared as well. For most children, love arrives in lullabies. For Willie, it arrived through strings and steel. His grandparents, Alfred and Nancy Nelson, were strict but kind, a blacksmith and a church musician who stitched faith and discipline into every corner of their tiny house. They couldn't give him much, but they gave him a songbook and the conviction that music could heal what life had broken. Tragedy, however, came early and often. When pneumonia claimed his grandfather Willie was only 6, he watched the man who had taught him his first chords take his final breath, and the grief carved something permanent into him. Decades later, he would write that losing his parents to neglect felt worse than death, but losing his grandfather to sickness was losing his anchor. From that moment on, the world became a little colder, the nights a little longer. Yet instead of collapsing, Willie began to write. At 7, he penned his first song, an awkward melody about heartbreak, far too mature for a boy his age. It wasn't childish imitation, it was instinct. Every line he wrote was a form of survival. By 9, he was performing in local taverns and school dances, his small voice trembling through gospel hymns and country tunes. He didn't play for attention, he played to quiet the ache. Even then, people noticed something strange about the way he sang. It wasn't polished, but it was real. There was a kind of wounded wisdom in his tone, a sadness that shouldn't have belonged to a child. But childhood was a luxury Willie never really had. He picked cotton under the brutal Texas sun until his fingers blistered and bled. He sold encyclopedias door to door to families who couldn't afford the dream he was selling. He worked any job he could find, tree trimmer, disc jockey bouncer, because hunger doesn't care how old you are. And yet through all the struggle, there was a stubborn light in him. At night, after long days in the fields, he would sit by the window and write. Sometimes it was about God, sometimes about loneliness, sometimes just about the road that seemed to call his name long before he had the means to answer. Bobby, his sister, remained his only constant. Together they found solace in music. When words failed them, chords spoke. She at the piano, he on guitar. They became each other's audience, each other's anchor. Long before Nashville, before fame, there was just 2 siblings trying to turn sorrow into song. By the time Willie turned 14, he wasn't dreaming of being rich. He was dreaming of being heard. He joined the Bohemian Polka Band, an odd mix of country jazz and European folk, a fusion that would quietly influence his style for decades. On stage, under cheap colored lights, he wasn't an abandoned boy anymore. He was somebody. even if it was only for the length of a song. Still, the pain lingered. In one rare interview, Willie confessed, "I sang to fill the silence because no one else was talking to me." That silence never left him. It simply learned how to harmonize. Music became both shield and confession. Every heartbreak, every goodbye, every moment of fear became a lyric. And, though he didn't know it yet, these years of invisible suffering would one day shape the very heartbeat of American country music. The loneliness of his childhood became his creative compass, the part of him that made his songs timeless. What audiences would later call authenticity was really just survival written in melody. When he finally walked onto national stages, the crowd didn't just hear a singer. They heard the boy from Abbott still trying to find his family through sound. And that is the paradox of Willie Nelson. The more the world listened, the more he was still just that child, searching for connection. But destiny wasn't done testing him. Fame wouldn't arrive in triumph. It would arrive in rejection, failure, and heartbreak disguised as opportunity. And the first taste of that battle would come not in glory, but in humiliation. Because before Willie Nelson became a legend, Nashville nearly broke him. When Willie Nelson first stepped into the music world, it wasn't with confidence, it was with desperation. He'd already been poor, lonely, and half-broken by the time he reached his 20s, and Nashville was supposed to be the promised land. The problem was, Nashville didn't want him. He arrived with a suitcase full of lyrics and a heart full of hope, sleeping in cheap boarding houses, taking shifts as a radio DJ, and selling encyclopedias door to door to stay alive. The same streets that birthed legends like Hank Williams looked right through him. His voice was called too nasal, his phrasing too strange, his look too plain. The music executives of the time wanted rhinestones, pompadours, and clean smiles. Willie showed up with quiet eyes, unkempt hair, and a truth they weren't ready to hear. He tried everything. He played the honky-tonks and dance halls where drunks demanded songs they could cry to, not the ones he wanted to sing. He'd spin records by day and perform by night, then go home to a drafty apartment and write by lamplight, chasing words that might one day pay rent. The man who would become the poet of country music was at that time just another invisible songwriter on the edge of quitting. Then came a moment that would define him and haunt him. It was 1959, and Willie had written a tender gospel song called Family Bible, inspired by the memory of his grandmother singing hymns after dinner. It was a love letter to faith and the kind of home he never had. But when bills piled up, he sold the song for $100 just to buy groceries. It became a hit for Claude Gray. The world sang his song. Willie, however, didn't even get credit. That heartbreak was the beginning of a pattern. He'd write brilliance, and others would reap the glory. Crazy became immortal through Patsy Cline's voice. Funny How Time Slips Away belonged to Billy Walker. Pretty Paper was Roy Orbison's Christmas standard. All masterpieces. None of them bore his name. Imagine it, the words that came from his pain, the music that had pulled him out of the dirt, echoing on every radio in America, while the man behind them sat alone, broke listening to someone else's applause. Nashville wasn't just ignoring Willie Nelson, it was erasing him. But failure has a strange way of shaping the ones who don't give up. Instead of softening, Willie sharpened. He started performing his own songs in smoky bars, his guitar triggers slung low, his voice rough but real. He didn't care that it wasn't pretty, he cared that it was true. Still, the industry refused to see it. Executives told him to cut his hair, wear brighter suits, and sound less like himself. RCA eventually dropped him. He was nearly 40, broke, heartbroken, and directionless. For most, that would have been the end. But Willie had already learned how to survive endings. Then, as if fate owed him one small mercy, Texas called him home. Back in Austin, the air felt different. The music scene there wasn't polished. It was raw, chaotic, alive. Long-haired hippies and old-school cowboys drank from the same bottles and danced to the same songs. For the first time, Willie's honesty wasn't out of place. It was the heartbeat of a new sound. He stopped pretending to fit in. He let his hair grow wore jeans instead of rhinestones and started writing exactly what he wanted. In 1973, he released Shotgun Willie, a defiant, unfiltered record that didn't ask for approval. Critics were confused. Fans were not. They heard something they'd never heard before, a man telling the truth without compromise. The dam broke. Phases and Stages followed a concept album about love loss and the quiet ache in between. And then came Red-Headed Stranger, a record so stripped down that Columbia Records tried to stop its release. It was too minimal, they said, too personal, too strange, but the world didn't agree. It was a revelation, a ghostly, whispering masterpiece that redefined what country music could be. For the first time, Willie Nelson didn't just write history, he became it. Within a year, he went from forgotten songwriter to national icon. Yet even as the spotlight found him, the shadows of his past never left. He smiled, he performed, he built his legend, but deep down, he carried every rejection, every grave, every letter he'd ever written to no one. And soon those shadows would begin to move again, because right when Willie Nelson's star reached its brightest, his life behind the scenes began to crumble. The music had saved him once, but could it save him again? But the darkest storm was still waiting on the horizon. By the mid-1970s, the boy from Abbott had become something no one in Nashville ever predicted: a movement. Willie Nelson wasn't just back, he was reborn, this time on his own terms. The rhinestone rules of country music had shattered, and from the dust rose a new sound: outlaw country. It was rough, honest, and alive, much like Willie himself. Austin had become his church. In dim bars filled with cigarette smoke and spilled beer, Willie played for bikers, hippies, and ranchers who saw in him the same wild truth they'd been hiding from the world. He sang about heartbreak and holiness in the same breath. He looked like a drifter, but on stage, he was a prophet, and the people listened. In 1973, Shotgun Willie marked his resurrection, an album that didn't care for radio polish or commercial sheen. It was sharp, soulful, and fearless. Critics called it messy. Fans called it real. Then came Phases and Stages, a heartbreak record told from both sides of a failed marriage filled with pain, so honest it felt like confession. But it was Red-Headed Stranger in 1975 that changed everything. Columbia Records nearly shelved it. Too quiet, they said, too bare. But Willie wouldn't budge. He'd already spent years being told what he wasn't. This time he would stand by what he was. The result: a haunting, minimalist masterpiece about love, murder, and redemption stitched together with silence and sincerity. It sounded like no one else, and that's why it worked. Red-Headed Stranger went platinum. The single Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain became his first #1 hit, as a singer proof that the man Nashville had rejected could rewrite its rules entirely. Willie Nelson had arrived. From there, his rise wasn't just success, it was cultural rebellion. He grew his hair into braids, wore bandanas instead of cowboy hats, and performed in jeans rather than rhinestone suits. He smoked weed on stage. He laughed at convention. He refused to apologize for being himself. America, tired of plastic perfection, fell in love with authenticity. By 1976, the movement had a name: the Outlaws. Alongside Waylon Jennings, Jesse Coulter, and Tom Paul Glazer, Willie released Wanted. The Outlaws, the first country album ever to go platinum. For the first time, the Misfits were the mainstream. Nashville's doors, once slammed shut, were now wide open, and Willie walked through them, barefoot, guitar in hand, smile calm as sunrise. And that guitar trigger wasn't just an instrument, it was his partner. Scarred, battered, signed by friends and ghosts, it carried every note of his life. When trigger goes, Willie once said softly, "I'll probably go too." The 1980s turned him into a household name. He crossed genres with Stardust, crooning classics like Georgia on My Mind, shocking those who thought a country singer couldn't touch pop standards. The album sold millions, proving again that Willie Nelson didn't follow trends, he created them. Hollywood noticed too. He co-starred with Robert Redford in The Electric Horseman, 1979, alongside Diane Cannon in Honeysuckle Rose, 1980, and appeared in a string of films where he essentially played himself, the gentle rebel with a guitar and a grin that hid 1,000 heartbreaks. But even as he graced red carpets, Willie never traded the road for luxury. He toured relentlessly, living out of buses, sleeping under open skies, sharing joints with roadies and jokes with drifters. He played farm aid concerts, raising millions for struggling farmers. To America, he became more than a musician. He was a folk hero, a man who'd lived through loss and still sang about love. Yet behind the serenity of those years, shadows gathered again. Fame has a way of amplifying everything adoration and temptation alike. Willie's life on the road was a blur of concerts, debts, divorces, and whiskey-soaked nights. His second marriage to Shirley Cawley collapsed after she discovered a hospital bill addressed to another woman, proof that Willie's private storms were just as fierce as the ones he sang about. Even success couldn't quiet the ghosts of his past. He'd earned millions but spent faster than he saved. He trusted friends who turned out to be careless with his finances. He built a home only to watch it burn to the ground. Still, he smiled through it all, lighting another joint, writing another song. That contradiction, that ability to stand calm in chaos, became the essence of Willie Nelson's legend. He wasn't pretending to be untouchable. He was showing that scars could sing. There's an old saying in country music, the best songs come from broken hearts. Willie proved it. His voice, gravel and gold, wasn't technically perfect, but it was human. It trembled where others polished, it cracked where others hid, and because of that, people believed him. By the late 1980s, he was more than a singer. He was a symbol. Presidents invited him, movie stars quoted him, farmers thanked him, and fans of every age called him simply Willie. But fame, as always, has two sides. Just as his outlaw kingdom reached its peak, another storm was forming, one that would test every ounce of strength he had left. Because for all the fires he had walked through, nothing could prepare him for the day the government came knocking. The man who had turned pain into poetry was about to face the one enemy that couldn't be charmed with a song, the IRS. But the darkest secret was yet to be revealed. Success for Willie Nelson was never a destination, it was a mirage. The brighter the light shone, the longer the shadows stretched. By the late 1980s, Willie stood at the summit of American music, beloved, rich, and seemingly untouchable. Yet behind the calm smile and the easy laughter, a quiet disaster was already unfolding. It began not with betrayal or heartbreak, but with a letter, a cold, bureaucratic letter. The IRS accused him of owing $16.7 million in unpaid taxes, a number so surreal that Willie initially thought it was a joke. It wasn't. Years of misplaced trust, bad accountants, and blind faith in business partners had led to financial ruin. His fortune was gone, his assets frozen, his future under siege. In November 1990, the unthinkable happened. Federal agents raided his ranch. They took everything, his studio equipment, his gold records, even personal items like clothes and boots. There's a photograph from that day that still haunts fans. Willie standing in the dust, watching strangers carry away pieces of his life. But there was one thing they couldn't take, his guitar Trigger. A friend had hidden it before the raid, smuggling it to safety. Willie later joked, "If Trigger goes, I go." But there was truth in that humor. That guitar wasn't just wood and strings, it was his lifeline. For most people, this would have been the end. But Willie Nelson had built a life on refusing to surrender. Instead of hiding, he did something no one expected. He sang his way out. In 1992, he released The IRS Tapes, Who'll Buy My Memories, a stripped-down album sold through late-night infomercials. Just Willie and his guitar, no studio tricks, no backup band, a man bearing his wounds in real time. The concept was almost absurd, yet profoundly human. He would sell his songs directly to the public to pay his debt. And unbelievably, America answered. Fans sent checks, bought tapes, and stood by the outlaw who had never lied to them. Slowly, painfully, the mountain began to crumble. By the mid-1990s, most of the debt was gone. He'd done it not through lawyers or loopholes, but through music. The man who had once been erased by Nashville had now written the greatest redemption arc in country history. But triumph never came without a toll. In December 1991, while the financial chaos still raged, Willie received a phone call that would break him in ways no government could. His firstborn son, Willie Nelson, was dead. Billy had inherited his father's gentleness and his shadows. He was working on a gospel album, a mirror of his father's spiritual struggle. But depression, isolation, and addiction had quietly consumed him. Willie's voice cracked when he later said, "I've never experienced anything so devastating in my life. There are no songs for a pain like that. No melody can hold the sound of a father's guilt." For years after Billy's death, Willie avoided Christmas. He said the season was too quiet. Fans noticed the change. His concerts grew softer, his pauses longer, as if he were listening for someone who would never answer. The 1990s and early 2000s became a long act of survival. Willie kept touring, kept smiling, kept giving, but behind the grin lived a haunted man, one who carried ghosts on stage. Every song became a conversation with the dead, with Billy, with his grandfather, with every love and loss that had shaped him. He faced health scares, legal trouble, and the slow betrayals of age, but nothing could silence him. Even when doctors warned his lungs were failing, he played on. Even when critics said he was past his prime, he released more albums. Even when the tabloids circled with rumors, he refused to hide. "You can't outsuffer me," he once joked. "I've already done the time." Then came the heartbreaks that fame couldn't shield him from. The death of Paul English, his drummer, enforcer, and lifelong friend, a man who'd protected him since the 1950s, sometimes with fists, sometimes with silence. "Paul kept me alive," Willie said. "He kept me honest." When Paul died in 2020, Willie called it the end of an era. 2 years later, in 2022, he lost his sister, Bobby Nelson, his first duet partner, his lifelong collaborator, the woman who'd been there since the dust roads of Abbott. She wasn't just his pianist, she was his memory. Her passing collapsed the last bridge to his childhood. Willie wrote, "Without my sister, I'd never be where I am today." When she died, the music changed again, slower, sadder, more sacred. And in September 2024, another loss. Kris Kristofferson, his fellow Highwayman, his poetic brother-in-arms. With Johnny Cash, Waylon Jennings, and now Chris gone, Willie became the last man standing. Fans still cheer when he steps on stage, but look closely. There's a flicker in his eyes, a silence between verses. The road that once carried his friends now echoes with ghosts. At 92, Willie Nelson remains the heartbeat of a bygone America, an outlaw whose rebellion has softened into wisdom. He still performs, still writes, still smiles that soft, knowing smile. But if you listen carefully, his voice carries the weight of time, every love lost, every bridge burned, every sunrise outlived. People call him a survivor, but the truth runs deeper. Willie Nelson didn't just survive tragedy, he transmuted it. Every scar became a chord, every loss a lyric, every breath a prayer. There's a line he once said that captures it all: "We're all just angels with one wing trying to fly by holding on to each other." And maybe that's what keeps him going. Not fame, not money, but connection. The belief that even pain can be shared and that the act of singing might just hold the world together for one more night. But as his body weakens and his circle grows smaller, the question lingers like smoke in the Texas air. When the music finally stops, will the silence bring peace? Or one last verse? By the time Willie Nelson reached his 90s, most men his age had long since retreated from the world. But Willie was never most men. He didn't slow down, he simply changed tempo. The road that once roared beneath his tour bus now hummed quietly. Beneath his boots, the applause of arenas, replaced by the soft rustle of Texas wind. His home near Spicewood, Texas, isn't a mansion or a monument. It's a refuge, a sanctuary built of wood memories and wide skies where the horizon feels endless enough to hold a lifetime of ghosts. Inside the walls breathe music. Gold records hang beside family photos, old posters fade beside handwritten lyrics, and somewhere near the window sits Trigger, scarred, sacred, and eternal. "That guitar's been through hell with me," he once said, "but it still sings. So does he." Despite chronic lung issues and the steady toll of time, Willie continues to perform, not because he has to, but because it's who he is. Breathing hurts some days, walking hurts on others, but when he steps on stage, the years fall away. His voice, thinner now, but deeper in truth, still carries the quiet power of a man who has made peace with his pain. He quit tobacco long ago, gave up smoking marijuana after a near collapse, and turned to edibles instead. It was a symbolic act, the fire gone, the embers still glowing. In 2015, he underwent stem cell treatment to repair his lungs, defying medical predictions that he'd never sing again. But he did, and he keeps doing it. When asked about aging, Willie simply smiles. "I don't hurt anywhere," he told the Associated Press in 2025. "I don't worry about dying." The words weren't arrogance. They were grace, the calm of a man who has made peace with his own mortality. Financially, the man who once lost everything has quietly rebuilt his fortune. Between touring royalties and his CBD brand, Willie's Remedy, his estimated net worth now hovers around $30 million. But none of it seems to matter much to him. He still drives his old tour bus, wears the same boots, and eats simple meals on his ranch. The same humility that defined his beginnings has come full circle. Family has become his greatest treasure. His children, especially Lucas and Micah Nelson, often join him on stage, carrying forward his legacy in both sound and spirit. Their harmonies, hauntingly similar to his own, turn each performance into something almost spiritual. Not a concert, but a communion. "I see a lot of myself in them," Willie once said, his eyes soft. "The good parts, I hope." In April 2025, Willie released his 76th studio album, The Last Leaf on the Tree, a poetic meditation on aging, endurance, and grace. Produced alongside Lucas, the album feels like a love letter to time itself. Critics called it the sound of peace. Each song flows like a memory, unspooling, gentle, unhurried, full of gratitude. It wasn't a farewell. It was a whisper, "I'm still here." When he isn't recording, Willie spends his days tending to his horses, walking his land, and watching the sunset stretch over the hills. Sometimes he strums Trigger softly on his porch, playing to no one but the ghosts that never left him. In those quiet moments, you can almost hear the past, the boy in Abbott, the outlaw in Austin, the father who lost his son, all blending into one endless chord. He remains the last living member of the Highwaymen, the legendary supergroup that once redefined American music. Johnny Cash, Waylon Jennings, and Kris Kristofferson are gone. Only Willie remains the final keeper of their fire. "I miss them," he says simply, "but I sing for them every night." Time has taken much from him, his health, his friends, his family, but it has given him something to clarity. In his 90s, Willie Nelson has nothing left to prove, yet everything left to give. His music has become quieter, wiser, and somehow even more alive. Because in the end, Willie's story was never about fame. It was about faith in music, in endurance, in the belief that as long as there's a song left to sing, the soul never really dies. But what happens when even the music starts to fade? When the last leaf truly falls? Few artists have blurred the line between legend and man as gracefully as Willie Nelson. His legacy isn't confined to the confines of country music. It flows through the very veins of American storytelling. For over 7 decades, he's been a symbol of rebellion, wrapped in tenderness, proof that truth sung from a broken heart can echo louder than any polished performance. When history remembers Willie Nelson, it won't just be for his songs. It will be for the way he rewrote what a song could be. In an era when Nashville polished every edge, Willie carved his truth into imperfection. He sang with a rasp, lagged behind the beat, and made timing itself sound human. that behind the bar phrasing, the way he floated between rhythm and silence, became his fingerprint, imitated but never replicated. He didn't just sing about heartbreak and redemption, he lived them. Each lyric a confession, each performance a reckoning. Where others saw genre, Willie saw communion. He brought together hippies and cowboys, conservatives and dreamers, sinners and saints. In the 1970s, that unity wasn't just music, it was revolution. But his influence reaches far beyond the stage. Willie Nelson helped change how America thought about freedom. His defiance wasn't loud or angry, it was gentle, unwavering, and profoundly human. He spoke about marijuana long before it was safe to, not as rebellion but as compassion. He raised money for farmers through farm aid, stood for the environment, and turned his own struggles into empathy for others. To his fans, Willie became more than a musician, he became a philosophy. The idea that you could live honestly, love freely, fail publicly, and still come out the other side singing. He was the living embodiment of the line he once wrote, "Still is still moving to me." His peers saw it too. Bob Dylan called him one of the most consistent voices of truth in American music. Johnny Cash called him the purest soul I ever knew. Even younger generations from Casey Musgraves to Ed Sheeran cite him not just as influence, but as compass. He's a bridge between the sepia world of Hank Williams and the streaming age of Spotify. The irony is, the man who never chased legacy ended up defining it. Willie didn't build a monument, he built a movement. His songs outlived radio trends. His ethics outlasted scandals. He showed the world that vulnerability is strength, that imperfection can be sacred, and that a single guitar can still tell the truth. But perhaps his most enduring contribution is the way he's aged publicly, fearlessly, and without bitterness. In a culture obsessed with youth, Willie turned old age into art. He sings about mortality, not as defeat, but as acceptance. In his later work especially, The Last Leaf on the Tree, death isn't an ending, it's a rhythm. When I go, he once said, I'll just be changing bus drivers. Today, universities study his songwriting. Young artists dissect his phrasing. Philosophers quote his lyrics in lectures about authenticity. And yet, if you asked Willie about it, he'd just smile and shrug. I never tried to be a legend, he once told Rolling Stone. I just didn't know how to quit. That's the essence of his legacy, endurance without ego. A man who never claimed perfection, but gave the world something better, truth set to melody. Even now, when he steps onto a stage, thin steady braids catching the light, the crowd rises not out of nostalgia, but reverence. They know they're not just watching a concert, they're witnessing living history. And when that final note fades, long after he's gone, America will still be humming the songs of Willie Nelson songs, born in poverty, tempered by pain, and delivered with grace. Because legends don't disappear, they dissolve into sound. But what happens when myth meets mortality? When the man behind the legend finally looks back? When we look at Willie Nelson today, it's tempting to see only the halo, the outlaw who defied Nashville, the poet who turned failure into folklore, the 92-year-old survivor who still stands beneath the stage lights. But to understand him fully, you have to accept the contradiction at his core. Willie Nelson is both myth and man, both sinner and saint. He spent a lifetime preaching compassion while leaving heartbreak in his wake. He wrote songs about loyalty, yet lived through 4 marriages, each ending in tears and unfinished apologies. He fought for farmers and freedom, but not always for himself. He has walked the line between redemption and regret so long that it's hard to tell where one ends and the other begins. And maybe that's the point. Maybe that tension is what made the music timeless. Because Willie's story isn't a fairy tale. It's a testament to imperfection. He didn't overcome pain by denying it. He outlasted it. Every time the world closed its doors, when Nashville rejected him, when the IRS humiliated him, when grief buried him, he opened another one, even if it led straight back into the storm. That stubborn hope is why millions still feel like they know him personally. There's also a haunting truth hidden in his smile. For decades, Willie has carried the weight of survival. To live this long after so many friends have gone is its own kind of tragedy. He is the last of the Highwaymen, the keeper of their laughter and their ghosts. The audience cheers when he plays On the Road Again, but look closely, his eyes aren't celebrating, they're remembering. In a world obsessed with reinvention, Willie never reinvented himself. He simply kept becoming more of who he already was. The outlaw who refused to conform became the elder who refuses to fade. And that consistency, that gentle defiance is why his songs still reach people who weren't even born when he first sang them. To me, the beauty of Willie Nelson isn't his fame or even his endurance. It's his clarity. He has stripped life down to its simplest chords: kindness, forgiveness, and music. You can't outlive your truth, he once said, but you can learn to sing it better. That's the wisdom he leaves behind, not as a superstar, but as a man who learned to turn pain into poetry. And yet, when we listen to him now, it's impossible not to feel that the end is near. Each performance feels like a conversation with time itself. Each breath carries the sound of someone who has made peace with everything except saying goodbye. When the day finally comes that the lights go dark and Trigger goes silent, the world will lose more than a musician. It will lose one of the last living links to an era when music was truth, when fame was earned in bars and heartbreak, not algorithms. So here's what this channel believes: Willie Nelson doesn't belong to country music. He belongs to human endurance itself. And when the curtain falls, he'll leave behind more than songs. He'll leave a lesson that life doesn't have to be pretty to be beautiful, but even beauty fades with time, and time for Willie Nelson is now whispering his name. There's a kind of silence that only comes at the end of a very long road, the kind Willie Nelson knows well. It's not the silence of absence, it's the silence of completion, the kind that follows a final chord when the echo still hangs in the air, trembling, unwilling to die. Somewhere in the Texas twilight, you can still find him sitting on his porch, the sky melting into gold and blue, Trigger resting across his lap. He doesn't play for the crowd anymore. He plays for the ghosts who never stopped listening: his son Billy, his sister Bobby Waylon, Johnny, Kris, the Highwayman, now walking on the other side of the horizon. You can almost see them if you squint through the dusk, waiting just beyond the light. The man who once sang of endless highways is nearing the last bend, but he's not afraid. You can feel it in the way he speaks now, quiet, steady, full of peace. "I don't worry about dying," he said recently. "I've had a hell of a ride." There's no bitterness, no grand farewell, just a man who has given the world every note, every tear, every breath, and is finally ready to rest. But even when that day comes, Willie Nelson will never truly leave. His songs have already folded themselves into the American memory, playing softly in diners at midnight, drifting from car radios on lonely highways, echoing in the hearts of those who've loved and lost and kept going anyway. Because that's what Willie taught us, not how to be famous, but how to endure, how to stumble and keep walking, how to break and still sing, how to outlive the storm long enough to see the sun rise again. When the time comes and the stage lights dim, it won't feel like an ending. It will feel like a homecoming, a man returning to the road that made him this time, heading somewhere quieter, somewhere kinder. And maybe if you listen closely on some faraway night, when the wind hums through the hills of Texas, you'll hear it, a faint familiar tune, a voice older than pain, softer than memory, singing one last line to the sky. Because some stories were never meant to be known, but now you know.